Well, I just hit the big 3-0 milestone a few weeks back. Now, I guess it's time to put the old boomer hat on and start ranting about how, back in my day, all the phones used to be made of actual bricks, and people had to walk 14 miles uphill, both ways through 20 inches of snow to reach a charging port. Although I suppose that last part's still not wholly divorced from the truth even nowadays. But anyway, everyone's always quick to rant about how feminism's ruined the dating and mating markets by poisoning the minds of women and girls to believe that they can both be strong, independent girl bosses and still find a handsome billionaire vampire boyfriend to pamper and treat them like little princesses well into their 30s. And while, like any good lie, this one wears its smatterings of truth like a sparkling silver brooch, I've said it once and I'll say it a million times more. You don't have to convince people to follow their instincts. Feminism didn't make women hypergamous. That is, it didn't convince them to be exclusively attracted to powerful, high-status men. And contrary to popular contention on the right, it wasn't social media or dating apps that conditioned the fairer sex into wanting to have hot monkey sex with the tall, tan, buff guy at the gym with the glass-cutter jawline and washboard abs. It also wasn't society that made hybristophilia a thing. All these things are just women being women. But if human psychology hasn't magically undergone a full system update in the last 60 years, then what happened? Why were pre-60s women more wifely than their modern counterparts? Or, not to put too fine a point on it, what made women of the past actually want to be wives and mothers, rather than their husbands' or boyfriends' lifelong passenger princesses? Quite simply the same thing that made men of the past want to work in coal mines or shovel horse manure for a living. The short answer is, they didn't. It's just that they wanted to die alone and/or destitute even less. A recurring theme my regular audience will have picked up on by now is the essentiality of reciprocal benefits to all functional human relationships, whether of a romantic variety or otherwise. As Karl Marx observed, the less the skill and exertion of strength implied in manual labor, in other words, the more modern industry becomes developed, the more is the labor of men superseded by that of women. Differences of age and sex have no longer any distinctive social validity for the working class. All are instruments of labor, more or less expensive to use according to their age and sex, something that always seems to fly under the radar of the academic economists and business majors, most likely because it can't be readily quantified and thus doesn't show up on their spreadsheets, is the informational weight that social status has on all markets, whose currents are directed by human thought and whose motors are powered by human action. In short, at the bottommost level, humans are motivated, that is, they are compelled to act, by two things: the needs of survival and the demands of procreation. And I use the word procreation instead of reproduction because I feel it more adequately encompasses all potential dimensions of external accomplishment. Think of all the great and/or famous people you've ever heard of, from scientists to conquerors, artists to philosophers. Now think about just why it is that you know their names. Chances are not one of them is remembered from beyond their grave for their success in the world of breeding. Unless, of course, they were exceptionally prolific like Genghis Khan, or less than upstanding in their procedures like Dr. Donald Klein, a fertility doctor from the 1970s who secretly swapped out sperm donations with his own. Now let us speak practically. Even in an ideal world, there will always be a certain baseline amount of obligations and restrictions incumbent upon anyone entering into a relationship with another human. Even if it's only a matter of you having less free time and disposable income, any form of commitment is always going to come at some expense to your personal autonomy and agency. In the case of women, this primarily comes in the form of their sexual choice, since, in a monogamous setting, she's expected to be sexually exclusive and regularly sexually available to her partner, as for whom, his primary responsibility is to maintain his partner's previous living standards, even if she elects to partially or wholly drop out of the labor force to have and raise their children. Now, that's about as far as most mainstream pundits want to take that discussion. However, there's one extra dimension I've yet to hear the right or the left, or even anyone in the manosphere or red pill spaces properly discuss. Though many on all sides will be quick to jump on both men and women for wanting to have their cake and eat it too, for wanting all the benefits of having a codicil partner, but not the obligations and restrictions that comes with. And while this is objectively correct, it's hardly a novel phenomenon. And even if it was, it wouldn't explain the stark chasm between women's stated and revealed preferences. i.e., women say they want to get married and have kids. But even a cursory examination of their actual behaviors reveals that their priorities are just about anywhere and everywhere except matrimony. The reasons for this apparent hypocritical dissociation aren't exactly hard to decipher if you put down your feelings and agendas for a moment and actually think about it from the woman's perspective. In the modern world, all adults are expected to provide for their own means of subsistence, to carry their own weight, as it were. Anyone who doesn't, man or woman, is looked down on as developmentally challenged, which, in the most literal, technical sense, is objectively correct. Something which is physically or mentally unequipped to look after itself is called a child, and I think we can all agree there's a few good reasons why we don't let actual children vote or handle finances. The problem is, if women can't be on their own without a man's support, i.e., if they're functionally equivalent to children, then how can we possibly justify granting them the same rights and responsibilities as an adult? Therefore, in order to justify their having equal rights to a man, they must be held to equivalent performance standards as men. This, however, runs completely and utterly contrary to our evolved intersexual programming, wherein, while the man busies himself with winning territory and resources from both the environment and from other men, the woman takes on the more mundane tasks of maintaining his established domain, which, back in the day, didn't just entail cooking and cleaning his house, but also would have included such work as producing textiles from wool to fabric, tending to the sick and enfeebled, gathering food, crafting supplies such as herbs for medicine, and even certain stones and wood for use in weapons and firekeeping. At various times, women could also have been found fletching arrows or packing musket cartridges. As well, it would be women's work to maintain the spiritual and/or cultural cohesion of the society and to educate the young in proper social etiquette and manners. This was why being a proper lady was such an important quality for a man to look for when selecting a wife. However, the issue we have in the modern day is because women are expected to be equal to their husbands in terms of status, which they cannot be if they're just another child for him to take care of, this precludes them from being dependent on a man for any of her actual needs. Food, water, shelter, etc. But as I said, feminism didn't make women hypergamous. All it actually did was give them social permission to act on their pre-existing instincts. But recall what I'm always saying about the interplay between truth and power. The former reveals, the latter enables. The ideas of feminism aren't new to modern times either. I'd recommend reading the book Occult Feminism for a full rundown of the historical evidences for this. However, recall that the women's liberation movement started in the mid-1840s, not the 1970s. But if women have had these inclinations forever, and if the permissive seeds were there for over a century before finally sprouting, what actually caused them to bear fruit when they did? Very simple. Recall what I said before about how men needed to compete with other men for rank and resources. Well, how did they historically go about this? Usually with big and/or pointed sticks. But now, all that's been erased. We're not a warrior culture anymore, and the factories and workshops and heavy jobs that took much upper body strength and/or decades of developed skill to perform with maximum proficiency had either been outsourced or automated. On top of this, modern contraceptives gave women absolute control over how, when, and by whom they got pregnant, if at all. But here's the snag. If we look at the actual data, that still doesn't fully explain the timeline. You'll notice marriage and birth rates only really seem to crater in the early 70s, around the time as the rise of second-wave feminism. Also, the point where the US traded our gold standard for fiat currency, but that's a whole separate world of problems I don't have the time or room to unpack just now. The US had been offshoring its manufacturing jobs pretty much since the end of World War II, and automation was pretty much just another weather pattern at that point. So, what gives? Well, remember what I said about housework a few minutes ago? Anyone who's tried making their own bread from scratch knows how time-consuming this process is. Also, if you've ever had the misfortune of handling a feather duster outside of an antique store, you'll know why we traded those things out for Swiffer dust cloths and vacuum cleaners. In less roundabout terms, I'm saying that, just as how corporations and the nanny state stripped the man of his household role and gradually piecemealed it out to foreigners, robots, and state-run institutions like the police and military, the woman's role was also co-opted by consumerist autocrats and divvied up among the schools, the television, and household appliances. In essence, men and women's lives both became so self-sufficient in their own roles that neither had any real need for, and thus saw no real value in the other anymore. And that's before we start talking about all the culture war and economic bullshit that worked to further accentuate this divide. But like I always say, incentives predate narratives. It's needs that influence behaviors, not sentiments or principles. No cultural acid will ever be potent enough to erode a tangible, needs-based relationship. It's been said of women that they've become the men they wanted to marry, and thus begot the 80-20 rule as a result of their hypergamous instinct to seek status through claiming exclusive intimacy rights with the other sex's uppermost tiers. This is true, as it is also the case that this natural inclination on their part, as well as on the part of men to seek power and status so as to become the men these women want to be exclusive with, conflicts with the whole equivalent status ethos of our modern egalitarian culture, and so they must work to bring the man down to her level, which then also conflicts with Briffault's law, and so the relationship ultimately self-destructs under the force of its own contradictions. And now, in the 2020s, with the rise of the internet, an equal and opposite force has arisen within the male tribe. With the widespread dissemination of infinite free sexual stimuli and primordial catharsis from our new digital ecosystems, a man can achieve, at least neurochemically, a simulacrum of his natural motives without even having to leave his house, which, combined with the mounting ambient pressures hitherto enunciated, results in an increasingly large percentage of them feeling little or no impetus to work any more than is necessary to provide for his own physical sustenance and the continuation of his relative peace and sanctitude. In slightly less haughty terms, a man left to his own natural devices can achieve a state that's all the good parts of having a wife and girlfriend and career without all the extra baggage, whether emotional, physical, or financial, that the real versions of these things come with. Essentially, in the 21st century, men have at last experienced similar emancipation from their traditional gender roles as women experienced from theirs 3 generations ago, and the world has no idea what to do about it because, for all their desperate, sophistic agitations to the contrary, men and women are not now, nor have we ever been equals, by which is meant as in a math equation functionally interchangeable. But that's just my take on it all, for whatever it's worth. As usual, let me know your thoughts down below. And while you're there, be sure to leave us a like, subscribe if you like what we do around here. Take a look at my stuff if you want to show this channel some more substantial support. And until next time, stay safe, stay sane, and remember, life's too short to take seriously. Peace be upon you.